What's up, guys? It's DK. Welcome to Thorn's YouTube channel. Why are you even here, though? Didn't you know Ginger Man bad?
This is going to be another of my Patreon video AMAs. I aim to do one a month. I'm going to actually try for the next few months to do 2 a month. I post a thread on the Patreon page. If you pay $10 or more, that's the access any of those tiers are above. You can ask a question in them. And as I say, I'm going to double up and do 2 a month. And I'm actually reaching out to some old patrons who no longer subscribe to see if they want to contribute some questions anyway. So here we go. Number 1 is from Bash, and it says, in the past, you mentioned your ability to read people rather quickly after meeting them. Is there some sort of method you use that you can share, or is it just an instinctual feeling? Cheers. Right, well, I would just say about that, the problem with trying to give advice in that regard is, yes, essentially it's intuition. It's a sense I get. It's little tells that I notice. The problem is, unless you're coming from the background I'm coming from, I don't really know how I'd explain it or actually describe how you'd go about doing it in the way I have. Like, I can't really give you my process, because if people are unaware, I am on the autistic spectrum. And as a result, I would actually say that when I reflect on my life, I had no ability whatsoever to read people when I first met them. I could not tell I essentially just went verbally. I tried to interpret the words they said or ask people, and I never really got what people were seeing when they looked at people's faces and saw their gestures and their movements. I never understood how did they interpret how someone was feeling, what they were thinking. It was actually a mystery to me. So it's something I've observed, I've thought about my entire life, essentially. I will actually say that being an interviewer in eSports leveled me up massively, because I did hundreds and hundreds of interviews face-to-face with people where I had to learn things like, does this person want me to go further in the question? Are they uncomfortable with this question? Do they want to just stop talking entirely? Do they want me to draw them more out of them? Like, are they enjoying the interview? Is this something that's a choice? I had to learn these things. So I would just say this. If you're someone who's a bit of a nerd, maybe you yourself have similar issues as I do, the areas I would suggest looking into would be like the pickup artist community, because that is all about how to read people, how to talk to people, how to understand what feedback you're getting from them, how to project a certain frame yourself, which is actually a vital component I often never understood, which is how you yourself are presenting, and what energy and kind of vibe you're giving off is going to be something that feeds into a feedback loop with them. I would say a game like poker in real life, face-to-face, can also help you if you start learning tells. There's actually a great book that people often use, even though it's not about poker, but to learn tells and these sorts of things. It's called What Everybody's Saying, or something like that. And it was by an FBI profiler who essentially tried to explain like how you look for tells on certain people and that sort of an angle. So there's something to start you off. Tyler Thompson says, as another fan of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, I really enjoyed the episode with Nothing as the guest. Have you seen this episode? If so, what did you think of it in regards to how they talked about CSGO, other esports games, and would you ever like to be on the podcast? I've thought about that before and thought it would be awesome. Right, so yes, I have seen the episode that Nothing was on. That was actually back in the days when I used to watch almost every episode. Now I'm much more selective. I mean, just does so many that, you know, there's not enough time in the day to watch someone's topics I'm not interested in. I actually thought the Nothing was quite underwhelming. He isn't someone I would put even in my top 50 people who I'd want to go and have an in-depth discussion with Joe Rogan. Like, he can do the very basics, and that's actually my problem, is I actually felt like Nothing's episode, he just was almost condescending in like how simplistic he made it, and how I felt like he was very eager to just agree with Joe Rogan and make it seem like Joe Rogan understood things that actually it seemed to me quite clear he didn't understand. And that's what's weird is, I mean, as far as I know, Nothing has watched many Joe Rogan Experience podcasts himself and is a fan. So what I don't get is, surely he should think to himself, well, when I watch an episode, I enjoy it when the guest has massive levels of insight, can go really deep down rabbit holes, doesn't just stay very surface level. And Joe Rogan gets into that as well. He kind of vibes off it, and that's what makes the great episodes. It's almost like he didn't think that through or have a game plan going in. So I would say, in a world where I was invited, I mean, obviously you have to be in, I think, somewhere in California, I would go on the show. Yeah, most likely. I think Joe Rogan's a pretty cool guy. Done a video about him on my side channel. I don't think it's ever going to happen personally, because it happens by invitation, or you have to have a massive internet stir. I don't think either of those is going to happen for me. And I think there's other people might be able to go on. Like, unfortunately, in the world we live in, it's way more likely that he's going to have someone like Ninja or Tfue or maybe even fucking Banks from Fear. These are the sorts, or Hex. These are the sorts of people, Nadeshot. These are the sorts of people who are going to get on that show a million times before me. Like, it's more niche that people would want me to be on it. And as you might expect, it's not something you request. So it's not something I'm particularly thinking is going to happen ever in my life. It's not a problem. Hopefully one day I'm doing the Joe Rogan level shit and I can just have whoever the fuck I want on my shows. That would be the better solution. That's always been my approach. I never ask for help. I never ask someone to do something. What I do is I just go and do what I want to do. And if that lets me get to where I need to, and along the way I can figure things out, cool. I'm not really someone who like looks for handouts in that regard. So I think it would be cool. Yeah, I'm with you, mate, but I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. Connor Jones says, I've been a huge CS fan for about 6 years now. I am one of those people who follows players and not teams, and one player I really like is Sticko, former Mouse Sports player, obviously playing, I think, with Sprout at one point. Was he actually on Sprout briefly? And then now he's on that team that is the Makalele team. That's godsend. There you go. Amazing that team actually got good when they went away from the Swedish talent. I do not know if you have any insight on him, but I always saw him as a more skilled tackler. I just want to know what you think is holding him back from being in a good team, right? I agree. Actually, Sticko's skill is probably the most underrated aspect of his game because unfortunately, since in Mouse Sports, his most high-profile team, he essentially was a support and played all the bitch roles and took all the abuse from everyone as far as I can tell. Even when it was somewhat good-natured, like just ribbing, he just always was the whipping boy. I do think that that's made people think that he is shit. Like, he is not shit at all. I think his biggest problem personally is mentally. Like, he's a guy where I almost feel like he needs teammates to pump him up. He doesn't seem to actually be able to, like, his own self-esteem base level doesn't seem as high as I'd expect for someone who actually has the skill, experience, and accomplishments that he does have. Because, as I was alluding to, when he was in Hellraisers, and I'm talking about the one that had Oscar in years and years ago, we're talking like 2016 now, he was a pretty skilled player, actually, and from supportive roles. Like, he was looking fucking good at that point. So I'm not surprised Mouse Sports picked him up eventually. So I think he could be a much better player than he thinks he would. Maybe he'd need someone to coach him, or he'd need someone who's a star player who believes in him in that sense. I think that would be the main thing that's holding him back. Because I do think he could be in a much better team. And I think with his experience, that's the case as well. I do think he's got a little bit of choke in him, because guess what? Choking comes from things like not feeling confident in yourself, like second-guessing yourself, questioning yourself, feeling like you don't deserve to win some degree, or that other people are better than you. So I think a lot of it's just psychological with him. I actually think his skill set, like, put it this way, put my brain in his body, I'll be the best fucking support player in the world. That's the level I actually think his raw skill is on. Shikez says, I'm not sure if I missed it, or I'm just having unusual trouble finding the normal post for question submission. All right, so this is because it's one that he sent me privately, which, by the way, I'm not really a huge fan of. But you know what? If you just can't find the thread, you can do it anyway, and I'll go back and find some of them. Like, some of these ones are from a couple of months back. So I figured I'd just ask here, do you think that there was a choking component that contributed to the way Liquid's summer run ended? He's talking about last year, with the pressure of an era on the line, or is the old narrative going back to 2016 no longer a factor? I do think in their careers that Elige, for example, still had some chalk in him in 2018. I think he actually got a lot of it out of him in 2019. I think it was very clutch then, actually. I think Twists can just sometimes have a day where his aim is off and he doesn't always know how to work around that. I don't know entirely how much of that is chalk, though. I've often thought he was just a guy where he has such an exceptional skill. That is his gift and his curse. I don't think Naf is a choker, quite frankly. I think he's always performed well against Astralis. So I do think Nitro is a big choker. I'll just say that straight up. Like, I've seen that guy just play in so many fucking games. Doesn't matter that. He's another player. Put me in his body, in my brain in his body. Like, we'll be dominating, boys. We'll shit on Astralis. And I don't think Stewie's a choker. I think certainly he gets down on himself. He has problems. But if anything, I like the fact that his method is like the way out is through. He goes for players. Sure, that can feed the game. He can definitely int. But I think generally he's got the spunk. He's got the fire that you like. So I don't think actually really there's much chalk overall in Liquid in the 2019 lineup. I think it was just that the player break actually did cripple them. And then the fact that they were doing badly in scrims, they just lost whatever the magic was that they had. They themselves in their minds. I don't think they actually did in the server. I still think they were close to potentially winning that round of 8 series. And I actually think, and I've always said this, if they'd have been on the other side of the bracket and they'd have met Astralis in the final, which I think they would have on the other side of the bracket, then I actually think that would have been an incredible match. That could have let them power up, and then we could have had the real big showdown in the grand finals. Whereas no one knew that Astralis was going to come into the round of 8 in that level. Bullshit if you say you do. They were fucking garbage at times when they were playing in the Swiss system. The map pool, no one could know they'd do that. But here's the thing, I reckon they pull out that Virgo pick elsewhere. Or they showcase enough on other maps, like they show the overpass game against Circuit B on the semi-finals against NRG, and therefore the Team Liquid guys are ready and they know, load up on B, like watch out with how we're going to play our positions there. Like I think there's many different angles they could have gone with. So to me, it's more like the player break angle. I genuinely believe if that major had taken place before the player break, listen, there's nobody who's like 100% favourite to win a major. That's just stupid to say. But I mean, I made an article about it. I think they would have been the highest chance to win a major ever. That is the level they were at. That is how fucking unbelievable that team was in that summer. I think their peak, in terms of their like raw peak, I actually think their raw peak was probably better. Actually, that's debatable. I'm trying to think. I can't really say it's better than Astralis because I don't know that they had the true rivals in the way that Astralis, because Astralis had the other version of Liquid. So I can't say that. But I'll just say the eye test of it was better than Astralis's, because Astralis, you have to understand the tactics and the implication of what they're doing and some of the threat elements and the utility usage. So it's a little bit more complicated. It doesn't pop as much. This team, they were the most skilled team to ever play CounterStrike. Underwater Gypsy, another old question, and then we get to the new ones, says, hi Thorin, been a fan since the early Summoning Insight days. That's actually early 2014, which is basically where I discovered you. So you can probably tell I'm mostly interested in League content, League of Legends. I've been wondering for a while now if you would ever revisit the idea of a Hall of Fame series for League, as I really liked the Mad Life one you did with Monty. And now that you have ended your show with Local, something like this could be a good test run for a new co-host with a League talk show. Potential candidates for the Hall of Fame could be guys like Uzi I, Wei Zhao, Deft, and Hai. All the best and Happy New Year. Also, where do we post our... this guy also says the same thing. Where do we post the question? You just look for a thread. I mean, I don't know if you can actually search on Patreon. Maybe I'll update it more and link back to it. The Hall of Fame concept, I thought, was the way that me and Monty were going to expand out and do the whole Insight and eSports like content umbrella, and then we'd bring other people on and we'd have our marketing network, and therefore they'd get a cut and we'd get a cut of their earnings. I thought it was going to be a whole media empire, but unfortunately, that was also like the year after that was when the year that was all going on was basically when Monty had to start doing Masters in OGN, and then the year after that was obviously LCK, and so he just had to cast so much that he got into those dire straits that a lot of casters do, where the doctor's telling you, like, you can't cast more, mate. Like, if you talk more, you're going to fuck your voice up. So he couldn't just do loads more content, massive long-form content, massive shows. So we only did, I think, like one of them with Mad Life, right? So at the time, I wouldn't have said I had the raw game knowledge in League of Legends to do it on my own. I could have painted the narratives and some of the wonderful poetic language about a player, but I needed an expert at that time. I certainly would consider this as a feature. I don't know with Monty. It's something that I could potentially talk to him about. Maybe we could do it for Cloud9. I do think it's a worthwhile concept, though, and I would like to bring it back, especially because now there are so many great players from Season 2, Season 3, Season 4 who don't play or play at a very low level and are just whack at this point in time, that way too many people are going to think they weren't that good and need to kind of learn the history that these guys were fucking monsters. So, yeah, I think it is something I probably would think about bringing back. Barbara Stanwick's Legs says, in your Fatality Redeemed video, you said that he was a 2 or 3-time world champion. In Quake 3/Quake Live, you're welcome to discuss other Quakes also. What tournaments were world championship titles, and what's your thought process on giving that designation? So essentially, in Counter-Strike, I often use the logic that a major, so a world championship, should have factors like it should have the most prestige or be among the most prestigious tournaments. It should probably be a tournament with big prize money. It's all well and good beating all the best players, all teams in the world, but if you win 5k and there's another tournament that has 50k, can't really be considered the world championship for my money. And then thirdly, it should in theory be open to everyone to qualify, as in it can't be a tournament where it's like only Swedish people can play it, because it doesn't matter even if Sweden has the top 5 players in the world. That is unfair. For all you know, there's a fucking Korean guy who, if there was an open qualifier he could have gone to, qualifies and wins the whole thing, and you don't know that the best player ever was stuck in Korea. Like, that's one of the things I think a world championship should potentially be able to bring out. So I actually think a lot of tournaments, like especially back in the day, you just paid or you signed up for Quake tournaments. So for me, in Quake Live, I think the IEM World Championship should count. I think ESWC is debatable because the prize money was way reduced when they came back. But obviously back in the day in Quake 3, it would have been one of the main ones. I think that QuakeCon has to be counted. Again, it fits all the criteria. And is there another one I would count for that year? I'm kind of torn on like the DreamHack Summers and DreamHack Winters because they did have very strong mainly DreamHack Winters were the ones that had the very strong lineups of players and teams. It's just the problem there is it can become weird that you're having World Championships so often. So that one's a little bit more debatable to me, and I feel like for certain years it could be. For example, like when some of the tournaments like IM went away, like DreamHack Winter was the shit at that point in time. So if you want to go way back in time, obviously, except for the original ones where you only won PCs, I would say the QuakeCons, the American CPLs, the summer and the winter events, these were massive events as well. QuakeCon again. These were the World Championships for me. I've given you kind of my definition there. Solico says, do you ever follow any small esports and just choose not to talk about them in your videos? For example, the Age of Empires German competitive scene. All right. If you do, how do you pick which esport to watch? And can you name a few you follow? This isn't going to be a surprise to anyone. I do occasionally make videos on these topics, but very, very rarely. I might actually increase that because, I have time and I actually have the chance to dive into some of these games where I could say something more meaningful than just big picture things. So I think if you're unaware, if you've only known me from CSGO or League of Legends, I would just say that I'm still very interested just as a fan in games like StarCraft Brood War, which is still being played as StarCraft Remastered, and Quake. I still watch it as Quake Champions, but I mainly just follow the players I like. The game itself has a massive flaws that have sort of put me off it in terms of following every big game and knowing all the series and all the matchups. Like, I don't give a fuck about that. I'm just watching it for fun, basically. And then people might know from some of my videos, usually around TI, I also do really enjoy Dota 2. I think it's one of the best viewing experiences in esports after Quake, Brood War, and then CounterStrike. I think after that, you have to put Dota 2. It's much better than League of Legends, way up there. So I would just say that, I choose not to talk about them because it's just not something that inspire my interest to make a video necessarily. And I'm not maybe putting in enough hours that it would kickstart that. I get my inspiration. I follow the other things for the other games, the ones that I kind of live and breathe. Let's have a look here. Underwater Gypsy says, have you considered doing more Summoning Insight Hall of Fames like the Mad Light? Oh, we already answered that one. But anyway, I asked you a question. Jerky's Minion, my boy. With people already jumping on board of the Valorant hype train just from watching streamers compete, CEOs are throwing plenty of cash to people's heads to get them on their team already. Can you give us examples of why this is foolish? Yeah. The simple ones would be as follows. First of all, we don't know what esports scene there will be. If you want to be a streamer, that's one thing. Competitively, though, we have no clue whatsoever. It might be a very small scene, like when Overwatch first began, and you can win small money here and there. So in that scenario, giving up another esports game, I think, would be a big problem if you had a chance to grind up and still get to be a great player. I think, secondly, you've got to add in it's a Riot Games game. I just think that Riot Games, in some of the ways that they've treated, and even this whole TSM situation, like, they're so capricious and at times disgusting in their behavior that I wouldn't want to compete in a game that Riot Games did. I'd want to compete in a Valve game because Valve just stays the fuck out generally. They've done a couple of fucked up things, refusing to unban certain people who match fixed and cheated when they were young or just as a one-off years ago and have paid their debt to society. But I would just say, there's the fact that I wouldn't want to work in a Riot Games game. Thirdly, I'd also say there is zero guarantee that even if you are good at the beginning of Valorant, that you'll be good when the game gets to its competitive phase. There is also zero guarantee that because you were good at a different esports game, you'll be good at Valorant. Like, Neo is the best CS player of all time, as far as I'm concerned. I've seen them all, and the only person who's competing with him is not Forrest. It's actually simple. So when I look at that, I then think, this guy was never close to that in CSGO, and he put in fucking insane hours. This guy was one of the most dedicated CSGO players I've ever seen as a pro, and he could never get close to his level. Markelov could never get to his level. Trace was a joke when he came into the game. He was just an alright player with some ups and downs. So, to me, it's so rare that you can cross over from game to game. I saw this from Quake versions as they moved through them all. I saw this in even the different metas of League of Legends, people couldn't adapt and were just left behind. They were like the best player in the world 2 years prior. So, this is crazy shit to me. I'm amazed people are jumping on it. But I get the people with desperation or the people who are just naive. Okay, I sort of understand that angle. It's the people who should know better are the ones I think are a bit whack. I'd wait and see on that one. Just play it on the side for fun. Matrim says, in your last AMA, you briefly touched on the various different metas throughout. Oh, by the way, the best reason to go Valorant is you like Valorant more than CSGO. If you do, then go ahead. You briefly touched on the various different metas throughout the history of CSGO, skill-based, team play-based, utility-based, etc. What were the biggest driving forces that led the pro scene into these different metas? It would be interesting to know if the meta changes are more based on map/economy changes or prompted by certain players/teams. I think it is the latter. In my opinion, it has always been the latter. Now listen, obviously Valve changing things in the game, like making a gun OP, can have a big impact. Like that essentially empowered teams like LDLC Envy to abuse the force buy meta. But it was them abusing it in the way that they abused it that made so many other teams opt into those gambles. And as you saw, when the skill went away, those guys just snowballed the game against themselves and crippled themselves in 2016 with the same fucking style of play. So I think it actually comes from the best teams. People try to figure out either how to do what they do or to find the counter to what they do. And I think that is what inspires the creativity. That's why the great players in games like Brood War, it comes from them and their builds and their approach and their strengths as to how the counters work between them and how the overall meta churns. Even when it's that someone lower figures something small out, the better player takes it, refines it, and implements it in a way that blows your mind. Hence the infamous Bisu build on the 3rd of March 2007 against Xavier in that GOM TV final. A match that Xavier was supposed to win, and that would be his coronation as essentially the GOAT of StarCraft. He obviously never won another major title after that. So yes, I think it's basically made on players. I also think that's what causes another factor is how you recruit, because you recruit based on how your team's doing and how the top teams are doing. So you recruit to beat an Astralis. That's what I think Team Liquid did. These are the ways that you change the meta overall, in my opinion. It comes from style of play and then collectively the team style of play. Xinged says, do you think that with the way that League is played right now, that Korea can get back to being the clear top region? Yes. I mean, they've just got so much talent there, not as much as China. I'd say a comparable amount of talent to Europe, although obviously some of their players with their training methods and their work ethic can get to a higher level. I mean, they've just got so many fantastic players there. Also, let's not trip a second, homie. You bring all the Koreans from China, the LPL, back to LCK, and immediately China will not be as good. They had a great team that was non-Korean, which was RNG. Guess what? They're not the one that won Worlds. The teams that have won Worlds heavily relied upon either star players, the Shy and Lucky, from Korea, or in the case of Doinby, someone basically who is playing a style that nobody else can play and is incredibly influential over the team. Shot calling elements, etc. So I think people have really been unfair in the sense that look at all the results that we've had in the West, except for the European teams. Koreans are aiding in this. Without Core JJ, there's no fucking world and impact. There's no world in which Team Liquid's getting to the final at MSI and beating IG. There's no universe in which some of these moves happen. So I think that people have actually been a bit unfair with that aspect because they forget and they think, oh, it's Chinese region. It's like, it's a Korean player, for fuck's sake. He could be playing in Korea if they had the money. So I would say that's part of it. You've got to have the money to keep the talent so they don't go elsewhere. But I think even in this meta, they could have amazing teams like this. They've got the skill for it. They're just stuck in a box, in a mentality. And some of that, in my opinion, comes from the coaching staff. I always thought Koreans are overrated coaches because a lot of what they do is iterative and they kind of stick with the herd and follow each other. And so as a result, it's blind leading the blind over there in that regard, in my opinion. I think actually, I'd love to see some Western coaches, this probably will never happen, come into Korea, get those players and just show them, like, this is how you fight early. This is how you skirmish. Yeah, you opt into this conflict, this gamble, because we've got the fucking strength. Like, we've got players like Clade who could brute force this shit. Let's just do this. Let's dominate these guys. They could easily be the best, not like easily be the best in the world, but they could be the best in the world again. And I do not think there's much limiting them aside from their own mental perspective. Shantano Pawar says, in your recent appearance on Pika's Advantage, actually that wasn't Pika's Advantage, it was some other show I forget the name of, but it was the one where we had to ask each other questions, but it was the Pika's Advantage guys, I get what you mean. You mentioned we might not get a reflection/Skrill with the interview with Forrest. I essentially told you will not get one, and that's one of the only ones I'm comfortable speaking about because it's just obvious. I mean, not only does he not really do those sorts of interviews, but I mean, let me just put it this way. I was on Forrest's team when I used to do those long-form interviews with all the great players, so enough said, right? As far as I know, he doesn't like to do interviews. So people don't like to do interviews. I also don't press them. I ask the people who want to do interviews. And then he basically says, like, who else is on that list? I'm not going to reveal that because I don't want people to pressure these people. I'll say it with Forrest because I know it's a done deal. It's not going to happen. So don't even waste your time doing it. I'm not going to ask him, and he's not going to reach out to me. So just leave it at that. In terms of other players, again, I won't list that. I'll keep trying for the ones I want. If I get them, I get them. If I don't, I don't. And in terms of this angle that I've heard many people tell me now that Cooler said he might do, well, I don't give a fuck what Cooler, I might do it. Well, who cares then? I want people who want to do interviews. If you want to do an interview, you're a great player, and I want you to do an interview, and the Venn diagram crosses, and there's that middle section, we'll do the interview. It'll happen. That'll be cool. If some really great player wanted to reach out to me, yeah, I'd potentially be open to doing it as long as it was someone I was interested in. I don't particularly care for the mind games and politics of Cooler, though. This is someone at times I knew pretty well in Quake Live. I even shared a room with him at one point in time. Well, on a number of occasions, actually. Not in some dodgy way, obviously, idiots. So I would just say on that one, I'm not going to feed into Cooler's ego on that one. He had his chances to do interviews. If he does them one day, cool. If he doesn't, it's not the end of the world for me. Interviews aren't the be-all and end-all to me. They're just cool. JDubs, it seems like that you've had a few discrete phases in your career, e.g. journalist grind, unstoppable streak of thoughts, Flashpoint creative director. Did this emerge from an overarching philosophy or goals? And how do you classify these different phases and what you've learned from them? The philosophy is anything I want to do, I start doing it. I then try to refine my process. I try to look at other people's processes and learn things from them, try and steal really great things from them that I can take and apply to myself, because if you can apply it to yourself, you haven't stolen it in that regard. If you make it your own. This includes people outside of esports, artists, all sorts of people, journalists, obviously. I've always wanted to improve. It's always been one of my main focal points. I actually have never thought that, even though, yes, relative to my peer group, I've been the absolute best for almost every year of my entire career. But relative to what's possible in the field of writing, journalism, content creation, yeah, I'm not anywhere close to the best. There's so far to go, and that's awesome. I can't wait to keep getting better, and let's see how far I can go and what I'm able to accomplish. It's very satisfying to get to new levels, and especially when as you break into a new level, you see there's 10 more levels and you're not even close. So in that kind of a world, I'm always thinking of that quote where they say that, like, the more logs of knowledge you throw onto the bonfire, the more, or the bonfire of knowledge or something, the more you expose how much darkness of ignorance there is. I've always thought that was really cool. So how would I classify those phases? Right, the journalist grind was just, that was the only thing I knew how to do. So I made it my mission in life to be the best I could possibly be at it. And that was regardless of hits, of money, of politics. I just did everything I could to be the absolute best interviewer and writer of long-form articles. Then you come to me doing all Thorin's Thoughts. Again, I wanted to level up. I wanted to show what's possible. I wanted to show that almost every other content creator in the scene, in comparison to me, isn't even scratching the potential of what you can do. And that actually, it's not that they're lazy, but this is what you see when you apply greatness. This is what you see when you actually have a mentality that you will not accept the standard of where you are now and that you want to go to a higher level. And then I would say, in terms of Flashpoint creative director, this is legitimately, it started as I thought I was just getting a cool job where they were going to give me all these millions and I'd do similar on-camera stuff and then I'd have some cool elements on the style, I'd get to do my content. I'm now basically going to be the workhorse in that regard. I'm putting the whole motherfucker on my back. I'm going to force people, including to do things like spend millions of dollars to buy players. And if they don't do these things, and these things do not happen, I will leave the project no matter what amount of money I am offered. So I would say the Flashpoint creative director has gone from being a really cool job offer with a little bit of a career pivot to now essentially being, I want to rescue CounterStrike before it eats itself and destroys itself with venture capital and investment. I want to provide a way out and save one of the games that I have loved for 20 years at this point in time. Spoon-fed, in terms of what I learned from them, I mean, you've sort of gotten some of those aspects what I've talked about there. I mean, one thing I would say is never expect credit, never expect people to appreciate what you've done, never expect people to understand what you've done or understand you. That's not something you can expect to happen from having success, from even manifesting who you are. Spoonfed89, do you think that we will reach the stage in esports where the devs will have little to no direct involvement in the administrative duties of their games, deciding on conflict of interest matters, or is this purely a pipe dream? I mean, this already happened. I mean, this essentially up until Riot Games came in, so let's say like 2011 in terms of realistically when they started to get properly involved with IEMs and all that garbage. I don't count that World Cyber Games in 2010. That was just a vanity project. Essentially up till that point in time, the devs had no contact whatsoever and they didn't administrate anything. It was Riot and then Blizzard and then Valve only in certain small matters who then came in that regard. So unfortunately, no, I don't think we'll ever go back to that. That's why actually Too Good in the idea of making a separate game to then make an esport was a decent premise. It's just it also misunderstood the industry and how much money you need yourself to invest in the esport and how you've got to build up a lot of it. And guess what? When you do that, you're going to think, well, shouldn't I have control over it? That's part of the problem, is you can't really organically have esports in the same way as you traditionally did. The developer is so important to funnel some of the money they make from the game back in the esports side, at least at the moment before we have massive broadcast rights and all that. And plus, I don't think any of these game devs who have those God-given fucking IP rights from the governments of the world are going to give those up to just let someone else run the game and make the money. We already saw that with Blizzard, who stupidly fucking killed the golden goose with Korean StarCraft. You utter cretins. Now, Hands on Keyboard says, "Hi Thorin, me and my friend were discussing the change in perceptions of roles in the NBA, particularly centers, and how it feels like the center players of the older era were basically playing a different game to those now. This made me think about supports. I have a hard time placing many of the new supports, players of this era of League of Legends, above the likes of Madlife, Mata, and others, because I saw how much they done with so little and how others could not replicate this. Wherein supports of this era are basically mini mids with a lot of resources and seem so far removed and stronger from the original role. What are your thoughts on this idea, and how would you compare the old guard to some of the newer greats, Mickey, X, Tosin, taking into account the disparity in role? In terms of centers, I mean, they literally changed the rules. Like, remember, if there was no three-point line, of course the tallest guy closest to the basket who shoots the highest percentage, you should absolutely funnel him the ball all the time. Plus, a famous thing that people say that shows you they don't know anything about the 1950s or 60s of basketball is when they say, well, Chamberlain was just dunking over like 5'8" white guys. It's like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, the average height of centers was something like taller than it is now back then. And he literally, if you know some of the people he played against back then, he played against the fucking GOAT era of centers. There are more true great Hall of Fame centers in that era than any other era in history. Go look up a guy called Bob Pettit if you want to know some things about that era of play. Go look up some of these fucking monster guys. You will find out that it is a very different game than you think. In fact, in that era, to me, that's what makes the Jerry Wests of the world the godlike guards, that they could perform like that in an era where their role isn't supposed to be the one that can carry or in any way be the best role in the game. So yes, similarly, that's why Madlife, Mata were the true goats of support. I mean, I'd even throw in, if you want to take some Western players and give them a little shine, I'd throw in players like Special back in TSM, N-Rated in Europe. These people were literally like shot callers, clutch players, meta-defining, did so much, and yet, yes, they had such limited tools and abilities versus the other players in the game. So I think these guys were very, very special. I agree with you. There is no support role in that sense anymore. And now it is about being a playmaker, someone who can protect someone who makes the lane so they can't be kill pressure, someone who coordinates with a jungler to gank mid. It's a totally different role now. To me, I wouldn't even say mini mid. I'd say it's like a second jungler. That's what I think actually support is at its best now. It's one of the reasons why I went from liking to play support in League of Legends, Nami, these sorts of champion Lulu. Now, I love playing support because all I do is lock in Pike, because I'm basically a second jungler, whether I'm behind or ahead, and I can win the game just off that alone, nothing to do with what goes on in the laning phase. So I think it's opened to a totally different game. I think in that sense, it's actually like Dota. It reminds me a little bit more of how Dota is played out, although Dota's obviously much more free range and a lot more flexible in terms of what you can do and what you can pick, etc. In terms of how they compare, I mean, you have to compare people to their era. It's very hard to compare in absolute sense. Otherwise, by that logic, Froggen is better than any player in the West to ever play, because aside from Caps, who else was the greatest mid laner in the world and wasn't Korean? Yeah, it's only Froggen, right? I mean, you could say Big Fat LP, but that really was a really decayed age in comparison to now. And those roles didn't even exist in the same way. I would say that you've picked out some good ones there. Mickey X, Tosin, obviously Hillasang. You can go ahead and take fucking Crisp from FPX. But that guy, I think, actually should have won the MVP because Tian did so much of what he did with Doinby, as far as I'm concerned. Crisp just looks like a fucking genius to me. Obviously Lamau, who just won with JDG. People enjoyed his performance. There are a lot of great players in that role, but yes, the role has clearly been shifted so that they can showcase that more. And so the baseline level of what I expect from a support is way, way higher. It is almost comparable to the best junglers and almost a laner. Not quite though, let's be real. Soren Bundsgaard says, even though I love that North has taken MSL back, it's really sad to see North still not being a competitive team. What would you change on the team to get them back in top 10 that would be realistic? Right, they've missed the window on that. They either have to go now and go to teams like Copenhagen Flames and get Farlig. They need to go to levels below that and scout the next talents before they come. Maybe go and get someone like Stown, depending on where he ends up. They need to go get these players, or they have to get a time machine. Because basically, a year ago, they could have gone and they could have had Acor, and they could have had Shush, and they could also have had fucking any of the players they wanted pretty much that are now in Mad Lions. And they could have put them with MSL, and they could have put them with AZ, or they could have put them with Kirby, and they could have had a very fucking good team right now that actually could be like top 10, I would say immediately, and would be contending potentially for titles if things went the right way. MSL is the right in-game leader for this team, it's just he doesn't have the right talent in my opinion. Too many of them are washed, too many of them are never wers, and some of them are never getting back to the level they were at before. So too limited in terms of playing style. MSL's just doing the best he can, and then financially, they're nowhere near the level of a Mad Lions. I mean, if they'd have gone to FPX, even what FPX would have been if they had the heroic lineup. Siler Hagen says, I'm curious, what news publications do you follow? Where do you go to get news, whether it is local, national, or international? First of all, when you mean news, like mainstream news, I don't follow that. Purposely so. I actually think that is cancer of the mind. I think those people are demons, and they just inspire fear and the worst thoughts and feelings towards races, genders, countries, different income brackets. I think it's all divide and conquer. I think it's all fucking bullshit. And I think to have it even in your life, to even let it into your world, is to let a demon into your mind and have that following you around, whispering the worst possible things about the people around you in your life on a day-to-day level, your family, your relationship, your community, your country, the wider world in general. So I don't do any of that things. And guess what? I have no problems whatsoever operating in this world and seeming like a quite informed person about the topics that matter, because they get through anyway. Those come through other channels. I don't need to have fucking people lie to my face all day long and spin shit, which is the opposite of what a journalist is supposed to do. A journalist is supposed to provide context. He is not supposed to omit it like a propaganda agent, like some shit out of George Orwell's 1984. So I do not, listen, this is only my opinion. I would recommend you do not also. Try taking a 2-month, 3-month detox from news and see how your life improves. Similarly to Twitter replies, by the way. Aspblaster 2000, got 2 more now, said, I have put some thought into the pillars of CounterStrike. That was a video I did where I divided it into skill, tactics, team play, just as a very simplistic model to break the game down to the layman. And it seems that it can be applied to describe almost any competitive esport. Yes, that's actually how I came up with the concept. It came from other games as well. When I think about League, so he's a League of Legends fan, I could describe teams with the same system, and it works reasonably well for a casual player to garner some context as to how the teams should match up. Yeah. There might not be a one-to-one correlation in the tactics pillar, that's correct, but I'd maybe put shot calling there, or like communication maybe, but I still think it holds up reasonably well. There might not be a strict playbook or set players, however teams do run setups for objective, and they also have a strict decision-making in certain cases, and there are some executions like turret diving and baron baiting. To wrap it up, what makes the pillars of Counter-Strike specific to CS and not other esports? I mean, there aren't really, you've kind of described it right there. Most of my concepts that I come up with in esports come from a place of the Miyamoto Musashi quote of trying to find the way in all things, where when you find it, you can see it in all things. That's kind of, it's not that there's necessarily a universal truth, but I can bring it back to my root philosophy and then build out from there from first principles. So do you think composure might be a good aspect to add to the pillars of Counter-Strike? No, because I don't think it's necessary to actually be composed to even be some of the greatest players of all time. We've had some mad chokers that have been fantastic players and done amazing things. I also think that what we call choking in some cases is just not being clutch. It's not always like some of the people in the middle, because they don't win, get called chokers, but they just weren't as good, or they were slightly worse, or they just weren't super clutch. So I think composure, it's just very tenuous. Also, like, I mean, in that sense, Device didn't have that, and now he has it in spades. So it's also kind of a little bit more tricky in that regard. And so I think generally I like just the model I've got. You can always expand out every model. You can always make every map more accurate. It's just that eventually it becomes a redundant exercise because it just becomes the thing it is. So I think I like the model as it is, but I see where you're going with that angle. The final question is by Sly Hippo. And he says, I saw the video of the CSGO/NBA crossover pre-show, I think, with the great Thorin versus Shaq banter moment. This was from early 2016 at the Road to Vegas. You can look up the clip online. Can you go into what the experience was like for you? Were you starstruck? Was it just business, like so, in and out, and no time to socialize? Any good insights on what parts of a TV broadcast can benefit esports? It was nice to see two interests coincide and felt like you were in your element. Yes, I absolutely was in my element. I mean, I've even watched that show for literally decades, and I know those guys, in terms of as a fan, pretty well, like kind of where they're at, what buttons you can press, etc. So I was going into that very well prepared in the sense of knowing what it could be like. And they were coming in completely blind. I think we're just a bunch of fucking nerds who play video games. So I actually talked about this on an episode that hasn't come out yet called Endemic Esports with Monty. I talk about, I think, maybe like 3/4 of the way through, kind of some of my thoughts on it. I've actually thought about doing a separate video on that, so I'll probably do a Thorin's thoughts on the experience. I'll just say that it was a lot of fun. It was actually even better than I expected. Unfortunately, I think Shaq didn't take it very well, but you know what? Who gives a fuck? You give it out, you're going to be able to take it, right? So I thought it was just a great moment, and crucially for me, the real moment, it was almost like a planting of the flag for esports, because it showed, you know what? We can fuck around too. We can banter. We can talk shit. You know what? Some of us are better than you guys. You were just great basketball players. So, who have entertaining personalities. So, yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Right, that'll be it. Everyone who donates $10 or more to my Patreon can submit a question to my next one, which will be before the end of this month in terms of the question thread. In fact, if you see this video now, go to Patreon and you will see a thread already. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, Emanuel Särnbratt, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, the Puyallup Tribe, Tobias Bernasconi, Xinged, and a special thanks always goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my shows? Maybe ask a question in my monthly video AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on my next content? Maybe you want to take part in one of those donated discussions with me where we go really deep into the weeds. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the description box link below.